I'm Jim Raines, a member of the Lawrence D. Miles Value Foundation Board of Directors. The Miles Value Foundation is a nonprofit organization that works to innovate, educate, and advocate the value methodology technique created by Larry Miles. Since you're watching this video, I'm assuming that you are somewhat familiar with Larry Miles. During Larry's life, he was an amazing inspiration to many people. I was fortunate to meet Larry in April 1984 in one of his final public speaking engagements held in Dayton, Ohio. Larry passed away on August 1st, 1985. As you might imagine, since Larry passed away, now over 30 years ago, many of the people that he inspired are also no longer with us. While I really did not know Larry, and he did not know me, we are fortunate to still have others with us that did know Larry and were inspired directly by him. Thus, the idea to make this video titled A Tribute to Larry Miles was born in an effort to capture from people that are still alive some of the more personal feelings that they have for Larry. As it turns out, we've lost many value engineering pioneers in the past several months, including some who agreed to be videoed, but were not. Fortunately, we were able to capture the thoughts of two folks before they passed on, so their story is still alive. Each of the VE pioneers interviewed for this production were asked the same set of questions. The questions were designed for us to learn firsthand what type of person Larry was and how he worked with and treated people. You can learn more about how he inspired people by reading this book, Recollections, which is now available as an ebook. So please sit back and enjoy our tribute to Larry Miles.
I met Larry in Chicago in 1981, and later my wife also met him. And Larry came back in 1983 for the SAVE International Conference, and I was a designated chauffeur, and I drove him around. That gave me a lot more one-on-one time, valuable time that I was able to spend with him. And I was thinking that I'm exchanging my experience with him. Looking back later, it's basically a learning experience.
The Dallas chapter of SAVE hosted the 1980 conference in Dallas, and Larry and Eleanor Miles both attended, and that was my first time to meet Larry.
Well, I met him at a National Capital chapter meeting. He used to invite the chapter out every summer to his home in Easton, and so we would go out there, and I met him, and he was very hospitable, he and Eleanor.
At a board meeting that was held at his and Eleanor's home, Sedgefield, in Eastern Maryland, back around 1979 or 80. They used to host board meetings every fall, and I was one of the lucky ones who got to go there.
I got into the field in 1964, and I was working for Ford as a value engineer, and they sent me to my first SAVE conference, which happened to be in Miami Beach. I can remember they had the conference at the Doral, and Larry was one of the keynote speakers at that conference. And until that time, I really had never met the man. I'd heard about the man by his reputation, but I'd never met him.
Well, the first time I met Larry in England, because he invited me to go to England to stay with him for 1 month and go to the different plants of GE at that time, and he asked me to participate in seminars and all that and workshops, and that's how I met him.
It was the very first planning meeting of SAVE in the Chain Bridge Hotel in Washington, D.C.
And what was your impression of him?
He was very intent on function analysis, the discipline. He was also very compassionate and encouraging of people.
Larry was one of those people who, when you walked into his home, you felt like you had just gotten home. From the very first moment I met him, and his wife Eleanor for that matter, they were just incredibly comfortable, welcoming, warm people.
My first impression was that he's a very sophisticated man. He and he was very open, very friendly.
He was a very impressionable guy, just interesting to be around, and just a people person.
How did your impression change over time of Larry?
Really, that question came up a few times. To me, I had the first and best impression to start with, because that's him. He can, you spend 5 minutes with him, he knows who he is, what he does, and so forth.
It never changed. He was always that way, and always very warm, invigorating person, to be around.
My impressions were positive from the very get-go, from the very beginning, and they got nothing but better after that, just only because I got to know him better as a person.
What's your fondest memory of Larry?
Larry, the fondest memory, it's kind of a little sad in a sense, and what I found about Larry is if he says something, he does it. And my years kind of a little foggy, but I think in 1985, either a few weeks or a couple of months before, he promised to respond to something I did. I got a letter, it was not signed by him, Eleanor signed for Larry, it was typed. He was in his deathbed, and even at that time, he wanted to be sure that he responded to my letter. And that's really, at that time it was like a sad thing, but looking back, it's how a great man he is to, with all the pain and everything he had, this is also important to him.
So what is the single character attribute you feel best describes Larry?
I think he was extremely creative, very open-minded, friendly, and you could ask him anything, and he would always give you answers. So he was always very helpful. Yeah.
Well, I've mentioned his humility once. I mean, he truly, I don't think actually realized what he had done for society when he developed the VA
He
process.
was totally dedicated to value analysis and also to all the people who practiced it.
He was very humble.
I think it was his kindness and openness and his willing to listen.
Can you tell us your best Larry story?
Probably the other best Larry story would be that when we went to Sedgefield for the board meetings, it was a weekend event. We would all stay in a small motel in Easton or St. Michael's. We would go to the Sedgefield place, and at the end of the first full day on Friday evening, Eleanor would have cooked dinner for all of us, and there was a rule there. You were not allowed in the kitchen. It was a very tiny kitchen, but that woman put out a spread unlike any you could imagine. Just spectacular food. It was first place I ever had soft shell crab. But we would eat out on their patio, which was, by the way, a patio that Larry and Eleanor built themselves, brick by brick. And probably my favorite part of that story was that as they would finish a section, they would have a drink and then dance on it at the end of the day.
So what did Larry do to help you personally?
It's really that if somebody suggests anything to you, don't get offended. You keep on. That's a chance to improve yourself.
It was encouragement. I think that's the key word. As we would talk, he recognized that I was new in the profession, and as time went on, I got to know him better, and I got to know the discipline much better. I started to experience some successes personally in the field, and
He guided me into the career of value analysis, value engineering by personally mentoring me.
What he did help me personally is the fact he believed, and I could see it in his eyes, he believed that I could do value engineering. He saw the potential and the possibilities, and that had a profound impact on my decision to pursue the value engineering profession.
He encouraged me to stay active in value analysis. And that was important because back then it was quite a man's world, and SAVE was maybe a perfect picture of the man's world. It was As they said at the time, it was a good old boy society. So it was a little tough to break through some of those barriers, but Larry was, and his wife Eleanor too, they were just absolutely inspirational of my path into the VA world.
Why do you think function-oriented thinking works so well?
Well, that's easy because it expands your mind. I mean, it gets you to think about new things in new ways.
I think because by running function-oriented thinking, you don't limit the possibilities by which you could perform these functions. Because normally people look at solutions and try to get cost reduction on a certain solution. But looking at the functions means that you are opening the way, you're forgetting about the existing situation, and from there on you're only talking about functions, and you are looking for different solutions. How could we perform the functions? I think that is the main thing, and that was also the big invention that he made at that time.
Because it takes the emotion out of the conversation. It keeps people focused on the subject matter as opposed to each other's personalities or preferences.
Well, it's to me, it's the only process that clearly identifies the root cause of any problem or any situation that you want to resolve.
Well, I think if you really cut through the chase and all the things that surround the discipline, it's the organized problem-solving system that's based around function analysis that made it work. It was logical, it was well thought out, it was a system of thinking that allowed you to truly analyze where you were, what some of the parameters were, look at the various options, look at a lot of alternatives, and come to a meaningful conclusion, not only in the terms of cost, but as you begin to think about performance and delivery and all the other quality aspects of the project you might be working on.
Again, I had to quote Larry. He said, function is really the reason why you do things. If you don't know the reason, and if you have the wrong reason, you end up in the wrong way.
Function-oriented thinking works so well because it unlocks the power of creativity in individuals. And I've seen this over and over again through study after study, that when you get into the function logic, functions and function logic, you see a tremendous amount of creativity begin to open up. And even with teams with older generations, you'll see people begin to think creatively. And so the power of creativity that is brought on by function thinking, I think, is one of the most significant aspects of what we do.
What do you think Larry would say about the state of the profession today?
You know, that's a mixed feeling about it. In one way, you know, it's kind of if I'm in an optimistic mode, one thing, and a pessimistic mode. But optimistic is that we're all trying. I think he will be proud of that we're still trying. I think he would be a little, I think, disappointed it didn't grow as much as it should, because he spent time in Japan and doing a lot of things on his own. But if you look at what he has accomplished and take today's leaders of 2030, I don't think we have done enough. But knowing him, he may still be very polite about it, but I wish we could do more. And I want to think that way. That's the only way we can improve our system.
Well, I think you'd be proud in the progress that the value engineering field has contributed to the overall success of not only what we're doing here in this nation, but as other companies and other organizations and other worlds and other nations are accomplishing.
I think he would be very happy that we have certainly perpetuated it, and I think he would be happy to see that we are embracing other value-enhancing methods and tools. I don't think Larry ever intended or thought that we would not innovate some additional tools and techniques. I think that's the other thing he was encouraging to do, and he did mention fast diagramming, and Charles, by the way, and so he was encouraging that we would continue to grow, and I think he would be very happy to see the kinds of things that we're doing both within the society and around the world.
I think Larry would be thrilled that it has expanded to the areas that it has, and especially to the countries. To think when he was alive that there would be VE in China or VA in China. Larry always said I don't care what you call it as long as you use it.
I think he would say, well, we have to freshen up a little bit. We have to put in more inspiration. We would have to laugh more, have more fun, and you know, that, because that's part of the game. I'm sure he would say that because we always had a lot of fun. And he said, well, if you want to be very good in your profession, you must also know how to laugh.
It's good advice. So, of all the many quotes that Larry has spoke, do you have one that stands out as your favorite?
I could say, well, he always said we have to look for alternatives. There are always alternatives somewhere around, but they don't show up if you don't look for them. So that's.
And he always say, value engineering does not solve problem; it only show possibilities.
He used to tell me, he says, no matter what you decide to do, he says, you will be successful at whatever you wish to do, as long as you don't care who gets the credit.
Well, that's one that I heard from him quite often. He said, you know, all cost is for function. He said, people want to eat fish and not bait a hook.
If I can't have the product, how do I get the function?
His favorite one that I remember is that he always kept saying that there are no problems, only opportunities.
If you had to give a speech honoring Larry Miles, what are the top 2 or 3 points you would make?
It's basically the reasons why you are doing it, and be satisfied with the possibilities they have shown.
The top 2 or 3 points I make is that I talk about his kindness, and then I talk about his positive attitude and thinking. He would always say, the glass is half full and not half empty.
He was a real innovative thinker.
Well, he was truly a people's man, and whenever you spoke to him, he made you feel that you're the most important person in the room at that time.
I think I would make the point that Larry inspired everybody he spoke to in one way or another. I would make the point that he was one of the most humble people I ever knew. He gave the world a gift and didn't realize it. And I would make the point that he just had an innate ability to make you feel so good about yourself that were he alive today, value analysis would probably be even bigger than it is.